I think I read just somewhere recently, and it was quite a good quote in actual fact. Might have been by last guest, actually, our next guest, who commented, it might have been you, Shamubeel, it might have been you, who said the rest of the country is going through a private recession. Wellington's going through a private and public recession at the moment, and that's why it's so much worse. And he joins us now. Shamubeel Eaqub, was that you that said that?
Sounds kind of like the things I'd say.
Yeah, and is there any way out for them? Because I think it's I'm struggling, but I just think it's intractable. You've got the whole working from home stuff. I can move to the provinces where there's sunshine, which Wellington doesn't get in decent weather. I can do my job from the Hawke's Bays or the Palmerston Norths or the Kapitis of this world, Nelson. Is there a path back for Wellington?
Absolutely. I think there is always a path back for every place, but it's going to look different. And the reason I say that is for exactly the same reasons you talked about, Michael, that there will be some people who are moving further out. And we've seen that in Wellington, right? In the last 10 years, Wellington City's population hasn't grown. It's all grown in the periphery as far as the Wairarapa. So we've seen people moving out. But at the same time, as people leave, Wellington's got this huge infrastructure of office buildings, of space, public space, and those kinds of things. And in the past, what we've seen is that's been backfilled by private sector. That hasn't happened this time because, of course, there's a wider recession going on. Who the hell wants to move to Wellington in this climate?
Well, there's the question when things pull up. You know, when we start to climb out of this recession, will they still come to the same conclusion?
I think they will, because we will see all of that office space and all of those amenities becoming far more affordable. So those places like Auckland, which are the competitors, while we're having a recession, it's going to bounce back really quickly. And Auckland's pretty expensive, right? It's pretty darn expensive to do business in. So from that perspective, you get this urban center that gives you all of those amenities. But for some businesses, you need that pool of workers, professional workers, that you can get in Wellington relatively easily. So I know it's easy to be very down on Wellington, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that is the case. But I think the demise of Wellington has been overplayed a little bit. But at the same time, it's not a guarantee, right? It's quite dysfunctional in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of this transition away from relatively large government to one where I think a lot of the head offices of big private businesses have moved away. So it's a really funny kind of situation, right? And the hard one is, when will Wellington find its mojo again? You remember it was like this in the 80s and early 90s. It was going through a really bleak period in Wellington, and then somehow it kind of found its strides again, and not only because of the government sector. It was also because so much of the private sector came back.
No, it was the private sector that made that happen. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, and it was exciting, right? I mean, so many amazing businesses that have come out of Wellington. But increasingly, I'm seeing many of those businesses being located in many different parts of New Zealand.
Actually, you and I appeared on a television program about 10 years ago. We weren't in the same room and we didn't meet each other, but it was to do with, I think, Television New Zealand did a documentary on zombie towns. Do you remember that?
Yeah, it would have been maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah, okay, was it that long ago? God, time flies.
We're getting old, man.
Oh, we are. Although I have to say, you keep your age very well, and I'm disturbed by that. There must be a painting somewhere in your home that's looking very old and withered, do you think? Anyhow, moving on. The thing about zombie towns was that you and I both had a thesis, and you had an economic one, and mine was sort of more of a social one, that there are towns that will never recover, that they've had their heyday, and there isn't a path back for them. And we talked about that then. I guess we were talking in some ways about the Karos, the Wairoas in Northern Hawke's Bay. We were also talking about, at that time, Wanganui, who rejected that label pretty much, and you'd have to say have done okay since. So I got
They've done a fabulous job, in fact. It's been growing like topsy.
Yeah, absolutely, and based upon, ironically, cheap real estate, because it was unpopular, and so people wanted to move there. But is there a potential for that sort of zombification to stop now, or are there towns that will never ever get back to anything like their heyday or even some form of prosperity?
Yeah, look, I think, for me, that was a big mea culpa in that it did look like in 2013, I think it was, when the census came out, places like Wanganui just hadn't grown for 20 years. And it felt like it was just getting older. Young people were voting with their feet and just leaving. And it felt really tough, right? It felt quite moribund. And then something happened after that. Our urban centers became toxic to their people. We started exporting people out of our urban centers going, we don't actually want to make homes for you. We don't want to make your quality of life good for you here. And the regions were like, come to us. We've actually got houses. We've got jobs. Come. Yep. And they did go. It doesn't mean that this short-lived, I think relatively short-lived boom in population and jobs is going to continue forever in every place. And what I mean by that is there are some small places that have, maybe one very big employer, a meat processing plant or a forestry processing plant. And when that closes, that's really hard because there is not a good reason for why people can make a living by living there. And that's really where my thesis around zombie towns was. It's probably less to do with those fairly large urban centers like Wanganui in hindsight, and more to do with those much smaller places that are really reliant on one or two jobs, job providers. And the other thing, of course, Michael, I think we talked about it at that time as well, was just the aging population, which is so much faster in our provinces. Not only because the birth rates have fallen, but because young people are leaving. My quip always is the biggest export of Southland isn't dairy, it's young people.
Yeah. Now, which brings me to the reason why you're on the show, and that is if there are zombie towns, then there may be zombie countries as well, and the potential for New Zealand to head in that. In the last 24 hours, there are record numbers of New Zealanders heading off overseas, and we'll come to that particular issue at the moment. At the same time as there are record welfare benefit numbers being recorded by the Ministry of Social Development. And yet, at the same time as there are record numbers of migrants having come in over the last 12 to 24 months to fill the jobs that apparently are unavailable in this country, but gee, there's a large number of Indian, Chinese, Filipino migrants who would disagree with you. This doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Can you make any sense of record benefit numbers on the one hand, record numbers of New Zealanders leaving the country, particularly to Australia, and then record numbers of Filipinos, Indians, Chinese, and Fijian Indians, I see here as well, who are coming into this country to take jobs that apparently aren't meant to be here? Can you make some sense of this?
Yeah, I think there's a few different things going on. If we kind of pick off the job losses in the first instance, so if you look at where the job losses are, it's mainly for younger people. So people under 30 are the ones who are losing jobs at the moment. And they went into work in quite a big way during the pandemic, partly because you could and because there were massive labor shortages, and partly because they needed the extra income because of the cost of living crisis. So a lot of young people put their shoulder to the wheel and contributed to the family finances. And those people are losing their jobs right now. Where there are job openings now, they're quite specialized, and there are very few job ads, right? If you look at, I think just in this week, we had the numbers from Seek that said job ads are down something like 20 or 30% over the last year, right? So very low number of vacancies. But those vacancies have become quite specialized. And we in New Zealand have relied on immigration to fill our vacancies over training our own people to fill those vacancies. It's a very lazy approach from business. And I do lay it at the feet of business because it's not good enough to say that there are people who are on benefits, there are people who are looking for work out there, and there are people who are looking for work, right? Yeah, those very few job ads that are out there are getting record number of applications every single day. But what we have is a situation where New Zealand businesses expect that they will hire somebody who's ready qualified for the vacancy that they have. They're not willing to put in any effort in training people up. Now, that's not how it works, right? You think about your life course and the starts that you got in life. People bring you up. People invest in you and you grow together, right? And that's something that's really been broken down. So that's part of the reason why we have the record number of immigration coming in. And the reason why a lot of young people are leaving, I think, are two things. One is around they're losing their jobs. That's a pretty big reason. And the other is, of course, a lot of them delayed their overseas experiences during the pandemic years. In fact, I was really surprised we didn't see a much bigger surge of people leaving New Zealand earlier once the border closures were removed. So we're seeing a whole bunch of different things working together. Does it all make sense? I think it's kind of plausible and explainable. Is it the right thing? I don't think so.